uh, Wednesday night class on the fundamentals of Judaism. We are a day away from the holiday of Shavuos. So we're actually going to take a little bit of what the Michtav Me'Eliyahu, Rav Dessler, talks about regarding Shavuos and try to understand what we're walking into with the holiday of Shavuos. So the first thing that Rav Dessler says is the very famous idea, I believe I've said it in shul in the past, is that when we observe holidays, we're not commemorating something, some sort of event that occurred in the past. And so much so that the way he says it is every Shabbos, we're really just celebrating the same Shabbos in a sense over and over again. And just we have a week to prepare ourselves to try and experience it in a better way, So the same thing with Shavuos, with Pesach, with Sukkot. It's the same holiday since when it began. And we get to that time of year that we get to re-experience whatever spiritual experiences the Jewish nation had at the original one. And we're just now in this time experiencing the same thing. So in that sense, we have to understand what exactly is Shavuos? What is it about that we have to tap into and try to experience? So we know there are many different names to every holiday. And one of the perhaps the most common name for Shavuos, besides Shavuos, is what's called Zman Matan Torasenu, the time of the giving of the Torah. We know the Jewish people, they stood at Har Sinai, practically somewhere around 3 million Jews standing at the foot of the mountain, ready to receive the Torah. And Hashem came to Moshe and he said to Moshe, you're going to come, I'm going to teach you everything, and then you're going to talk to the Jewish people. Moshe said, okay, let me tell them. Moshe comes down. He tells us that that's what he wants. That's the plan. Bnei Yisrael, the Jewish people, says no. We're not interested. That's not the way we want it to go down. We're not interested in that. Moshe, we love you, but ritzonenu, our desire, liros is to see Malkeinu, our king. We want it from Hashem. We want to hear it directly from Hashem, directly from God's mouth. We don't want to hear it from you as an intermediary. We want to see our king. We love him. We want to connect to him, and we want to see him deeply. So Hashem said, okay, no problem. And Hashem, as we know, the first two commandments, Anochi, Lo Yelecha, that I am Hashem, your God, who took you out of Egypt, and that there shall not be any idols that you'll serve, no other gods. Those were said mipi hagvura. Those were said from the mouth of Hashem directly. We heard that straight from Hashem. The other 8, at that point, we felt the Jewish nation said, oh, this is getting a little bit too much for us. The spiritual infusion that the nation was going through was something that they felt they couldn't handle. And therefore they said, okay, now let Moshe, you take care of the rest. And sure enough, Moshe related the rest of the Torah, the rest of the 10 commandments, and so on. But there was that point where we told Hashem, Ritzonenu, our desire is Liros Es Malkeinu, we want to see our king. Now, Zman Matan Torasenu, giving of the Torah implies that there's a transaction. Somebody giving something, there has to be somebody taking something. Right? Imagine you go to a store and we would just take. Can't take without being given in a store. And there's only one form of currency in a store. It's the money, you got to pay, right? So now, and imagine if a store owner would constantly just give without a transaction and he would just throw things out the store, right? Wouldn't make any money and be terrible for his business. So in any matan, in any handling, in any transaction, there's always the giver and the recipient. So says Rav Dessler that the idea of Shavuos is that we have to make ourselves the recipients for the Torah. Hashem is ready to give. He's handing it to us. Tomorrow, there's Friday and Shabbos, Hashem is ready saying, here, I'm giving it to you. I'm here to give it to you. So we have to be ready and available to receive it and to take it. We have to be willing to accept it. Now, what's the currency? He says, very interesting. What's the currency that we use to get the Torah? It says it's a determination and connection to be connected to Hashem. The same way we had Ritzonenu Liros Es Malkeinu, then we said we want to see our God, we want to see our King. So when we have that desire, that's the money that we pay to say, you want me? You want me to? Okay, I'm going to give it to you. Now you've earned it. It's not something per se that we have to do so much so as, give money to something or another. We're not buying anything in that sense, but rather what we're giving is ourselves. And we're giving ourselves to connect to Hashem and say, this is what I want to do. This is what I want. I want that connection. I want to see you, my King. And then Hashem says, okay, you're ready to purchase? Now let me check you out. Here you go. Here's the Torah. Now, Zman Matan, that's the idea of Zman Matan Torah, saying a little bit what Rav Dessler tries to impart for us. And that's what we're really going through, what we're experiencing. So on Shavuos, we should think to ourselves, Thursday night, Friday, Shabbos, think to ourselves that we're here and I want to see Hashem. I want to connect to him in a deep and meaningful way. Hashem will say, okay, now I'll give you the Torah. It actually, I didn't, just thinking about this now, it actually relates to the idea that we mentioned last time of schar mitzvah. The reward for one mitzvah is another mitzvah. The reward of being the desire to connect is the ability to connect to the Torah. That's the idea. Now, there are many facets to accepting the Torah. In fact, in Pirkei Avos, there's something called the Memches Kinyanim, the 48 different ways to acquire Torah. Some of them are obvious. Some of them are, well, you gotta really sit and you gotta study and you gotta review the basic things. You can't sleep too much because then it's, waste time. Think of you're studying for your finals or whatever it is. You're studying for some big exam. So you gotta really, really work hard at it. And that's how you get it. So the Torah has the same thing. In that sense, we have a lot of those things. On the other hand, some of the things are less intuitive. Say things that make sense as an individual, as a human being, but not something you'd necessarily associate with acquiring knowledge. For example, it says you have to be nosei ba'ol im chavero. You have to bear your friend's burden. If you see somebody suffering, you got to be there for them. Be empathetic with them, understand where they are and how they're feeling. Right? If I want to do well on my LSATs or whatever it is, I don't need to care about anybody else. I just need to know a certain amount of knowledge. If I want to pass my MCATs, I got to get the knowledge down. It's just basic knowledge. It has nothing to do with interpersonal relationships per se, right? But the Torah is not like that. The Torah is not just a body of knowledge. Torah is a path of life. And in order to acquire and to receive the full package, so to speak, we have to have all the parts. We have to have the knowledge. We have to learn as much as we can and try and grow in those areas. But we also have to be caring human beings, because part of the Torah is living and including and being part of other people's lives. And therefore, part and parcel of accepting the Torah are these kinds of things: bearing somebody else's burden, giving gemilus chasadim, giving your time or your ability to help other people. All these kinds of things are part of the Torah to acquire the Torah in a wholesome way. Now, I'm going to share with you a medrash that I heard, beautiful, beautiful medrash, which gives us one of those types of things that intuitively we might not have thought is the way to acquire a body of knowledge. But now that we see there's a little bit more than just knowledge, then we'll see how this really ties in beautifully. The medrash says like this: it was the 6th of Sivan. It was the day that the Jewish nation was getting the Torah. And we know Hashem came down in a dark cloud, and there was lightning and thunder and sounds. The shofar was blowing. And when a person blows a shofar, so they start off with a big gust of wind out of their lungs, and it's very loud sound at the beginning. And the longer they blow, the more diminished the sound will get. But this was kol shofar holechu mischazek, that it was kept on getting stronger and louder as it kept being blown. This is obviously supernatural. It's from Hashem. And there was this tremendous, in the entire world, there was this tremendous uproar. People were recognizing from all over the world that something was happening. So the Medrash says that the nations of the world sent a delegation to Bilam Harasha. Bilam, we know, tried to curse the Jewish people in the desert. He was one of the prophets. Hashem gave the non-Jews a prophet so they should not have any complaints and say, oh, you gave the Jewish people a prophet. That's why they turned out so good. If we would have had a prophet, we also would have been fine. I said, okay, you're right. That's a fair claim. Here's Bilam. You can have him. Right? So Bilam was he had quite the Gemara says that according to some opinions, Bilam knew things that Moshe didn't know. It's interesting to note. And he was a very high level prophet in that respect. And the nations of the world sent messengers, said, Bilam, what is going on? Is there some sort of flood that's going to flood the world? Is there some sort of fire that's going to destroy the world? Well, what is happening? This whole commotion. What's going on? Some terrible tragedy that didn't make the front page of the New York Times this morning? What are we missing? So Balaam said, no. Nothing's going on. Go back home. What's going on has nothing to do with us. The Jewish people are getting the Torah. And that was it. And the delegation left, and everybody was happy. That was a very interesting medrash. What are the rabbis trying to tell us by giving us over this message of this conversation between the nations of the world and Bilam? So I saw, or I heard in the name of Rabbi Yerucham Olshin, and he says as follows: beautiful, beautiful idea. He says, you know what was happening? Says, generally speaking, the nations of the world, when do they get together? When is there unity? When is there camaraderie amongst the nations of the world? Generally speaking, people come together when there's suffering, right? And think in our time, we had, the Boston bombing. Boston Strong suddenly became a thing to say or put on your car or whatever it is, right? We have unity. Let's show the world that we are together. When there's suffering, it brings people together, right? And that's normal. It's not a bad thing, but that's just the way it is. However, to have such national unity for the sake of a positive thing doesn't really happen so often. However, the Jewish people get together for suffering and pain, no question about it, but they also get together for something else, something purely positive. What is it? It's the Torah. The Jewish nation, every single stripe, every single flavor has one thing in common, no matter what across the globe. They were all at the foot of the mountain, getting the Torah from Hashem. The Torah is the ultimate unifier of the Jewish nation. It's what brings us all together. So much so, the Gemara in Sota says, it wasn't just like I got the Torah for myself. I got the Torah, and I made a promise that I would help every other person in the Jewish nation do it. And every single person made that very same promise to guarantee that I'm going to make sure, I'm going to do my best to help everybody else in the Jewish nation as well fulfill the Torah or do the best. Right? We know there's a concept that if you come to shul on Shabbos morning, the Adam Street Shul has a beautiful Kiddush, and the rabbi says Kiddush, and then you go home. Now, if your entire family is at the Kiddush, so then you go home and you sit down and you wash for Hamotzi and you eat your meal. Sometimes there's people at home that didn't hear Kiddush yet. So what do? You go say Kiddush for them. Well, wait a minute. Didn't you say Kiddush already? Yeah, I can do it twice. The Torah says say Kiddush once, right? You do it twice. And then you know what would happen if somebody would walk into your house and knock on the door and say, hey, I didn't get a meal. Can I come over? Sure, come on. Did you hear Kiddush? No? Okay, I'll say it for you. The third time. And you can say them 15 times if needed. So where does that come from? It comes from a concept called Kol Yisrael Arevim Zel Hazeh. Every Jew is responsible for the other. So therefore, if you haven't fulfilled something, I'm just as responsible and I can help you with that. If I'm missing something, then you can help me fill in the gaps. And therefore, I have the ability to say Kiddush 15 times if needed. And so do you, because we have that relationship that we're responsible for each other. Where did that come from? It came at Har Sinai. It came when we got the Torah. It was at that time, I'm getting the Torah. Thank you, Hashem. You know what? I'm also accepting on myself that I'm going to be responsible for each and every Jew. And I'm going to help them if I can, in any way that I can. And that is the ultimate unifier to the Jewish nation. It's the Torah. So if we could take the first thing we said is that Shavuos is coming, and we should imagine to ourselves, we're doing this over again. We're standing at the mountain. We're standing at Har Sinai. Zman Matan Torah saying we want to be the recipients. Hashem is giving it. The cost, so to speak, is we want to tell Hashem, we want to see you, Hashem, we want to greet you, we want to connect to you. And Hashem will give us the Torah. Once we've gotten the Torah, so now we're going to say, Hashem, okay, thank you for giving it to me. I'm also accepting on myself to be part of the Jewish nation, and that we're all going to do this together. That's the underlying understanding of what Shavuos is really coming to do. So this is why for generations and generations, people stay up all night studying the Torah to be ready. You know that at Har Sinai, when in the actual event, there's a little bit of a mistake. What happened was that we slept in late, and Hashem came, and Hashem woke us up. And really, it should have been the opposite. We should have gotten up and been ready at the foot of the mountain. So for generations, we stay up all night. People have accustomed to stay up because they want to go ahead and fix the mistake, so to speak, that we made last time. Say, no, we're here. Hashem, we want to see you. So sometimes it's hard to stay up. It's obvious, it should come at a cost of the rest of the holiday, that you should be uncomfortable and miserable and whatever, obviously. And therefore, the shuls have accustomed to stay up for a little bit, and then you wake up, go back to sleep and come back for Shacharis, whatever it is. But the point is there's something extra that's being done that we wouldn't normally do on a regular Shabbos or a regular Yom. We're learning a little bit more. Okay, so we'll have Amir Hashem on Shabbos. We'll have a meal here, and there'll be different people talking about different areas in the Torah, and that will be where we'll learn for our shul. But if a person could do more, take any book, whatever language you're most comfortable with, something that talks about the mitzvahs, talks about connection to Hashem, whatever it might be. Add a little something, because that's what Shavuos is really about. We're doing this because we say, Hashem, we want to connect. This is what we're really looking for. This is what we're driving towards. Now, I want to tell you a story that I heard from my Rebbe, Rav Elya Baruch Finkel Zatzal. So the most famous Finkel is the Alter of Slobodka, who's known as Rav Nosson Tzvi Finkel, who lived 150 years ago, something like that. And his great-grandson, somewhere around there, was the Rosh Yeshiva of the Mir Yeshiva in Israel, also named Rav Nosson Tzvi Finkel. And he had a cousin. His cousin was Rav Elya Baruch Finkel. He was my Rebbe when I learned in the yeshiva in Mir. I learned under him. My son is named after this Rebbe of mine. I had a very close relationship with him, and I learned a tremendous amount from him, both in the knowledge, the general knowledge, and how to be a person and how to act. And he told us the following story. There's a discussion. The discussion is in Megillas Rus. Rus is what we read on Shavuos, and we talk about how Rus started off as a non-Jew, married to the son of Naomi, saw this woman who was beyond her imagination. She saw someone who was so profound, so dedicated, so real, and she said, I want to be like that woman. She's inspiring me. I want to be wherever she goes. Wherever you go, I'll go. Part of the conversation that she had was, where you go, I'll go. Where you sleep, I'll sleep. Your God is my God. And she converted to Judaism. This is one of the most famous names. Many women who become Gerim, who convert, they take on the name Rus. They take on that name because of who she was and what a tremendous individual she was. And there's a discussion. Rus came from a country, a nation called Moab. Rus HaMoaviyah. She was from Moab. The Torah says one may not marry someone from Moab. Okay, so now then, well, Boaz, who at the time was the leader of the generation, married Rus. So what does it mean that she's not allowed to marry? So the Gemara says, don't worry, you cannot marry a Moab. There's a discussion what this meant at the time, that Rus becoming a Jew. This is when it took place. When it says you cannot marry someone from Moab, it says Moavi, Amoni Moavi lo yavo b'kal Hashem. A Moavi cannot come. Now, what does that word Moavi mean? Does it mean a person from the nation of Moab, or does it mean a male from the nation of Moab? Because it is when in Hebrew, nationalities are always in the male tense, in the male language, male form, as opposed to the female form. Right? Land is always in female form. Nations are always in B'nai Yisrael, even though it refers to the men and women and children. They're still called B'nai Yisrael, even though it's the male. Right? So the Boaz and others had paskin, and this was the halacha. This is what the halacha is today. Obviously, it's not really relevant, but it means that only men from such a nation, if they were to convert, we wouldn't be allowed to marry them. There's a way that they can eventually, their children maybe can marry Jewish people, but then right away we wouldn't let them marry. Okay, so Rus, who was a woman, she was allowed to convert, and therefore perfectly fine for her to marry Boaz. And the reason why this was written, it was written because Shmuel Hanavi saw that David HaMelech was going to become king. And David HaMelech was going to become king. He's a descendant of Rus. And people were going to question him. Maybe David's not fit to be king. So Shmuel Hanavi said, I got to write this down. People should know that this is clean, 100%. This is the way it's supposed to be. Okay? But there's a discussion. The Torah says that because of certain things that the nations of Ammon and Moab did to us, we can't ask how you're doing for no reason. You can't just friendly chatter with a person from Moab. They were very, very egregious to us. They went at a time where we were down, you kick a guy when he's down. That's what they did to us. Therefore, Hashem said, if you need them and they need you and you have some sort of working relationship, fine. But just out of your way, go say, hi, how you doing? You can't do it. Okay? And the question is, does this apply if a man from Moab would convert? Can you do it when it's, you're still not allowed to ask him when he's Jewish, when he's not Jewish? How does all this stuff work? And there's a big discussion. And one of the questions that Rav Shach was the Rosh Yeshiva of the Panovich Yeshiva, he wrote it in his sefer and says, according to this and this opinion, the question from the fact that Boaz married Rus is a question that I can't answer. Okay? And this question, whatever the question was, we don't have to get into the depths of it. Rav Elya Baruch Finkel was a young man. He was not married yet, and he was learning in the Panovich Yeshiva. And he figured out an answer to his Rosh Yeshiva, to Rav Shach's question. So he went to Rav Shach and he told him, he presented his answer. So Rav Shach said, okay, I'll think about it. The next day, Rav Elia Baruch was sitting in the base measures, and Rav Shach sent somebody, comes to him, somebody else taps him on the shoulder and says, Rav Shach wants to see you in his house. Okay, right? So he goes to Rav Shach's house. As soon as he knocks on the door, Rav Shach opens the door, pulls him in, and is dancing with him and singing for 5-10 minutes over and over again. And he says, I've had this question for years and years. And when you gave me that answer, you gave me such appreciation for understanding another piece of the Torah that until now I had not understood. Thank you so much. And dancing with him. And Rav Elia Baruch told us this story. And he said, what the greatest lesson that he had learned from that experience was that besides it's exciting. You imagine making a puzzle when you finish the puzzle. Finished it, great, right? The Torah, the love for the Torah to understand something. Oh, wow, that was amazing. And to have absolute love, even for the smallest of questions, whatever it might have been. It wasn't this major big thing that would have taken hours and hours to explain. Oh, man, how about this answer? He gave an answer. It says the love for the Torah was a lesson that he learned for life. And that to love everything that we learn and to enjoy it. And that's the connection that we have to Hashem. We see from Pirkei Avos the 48 ways to connect, to acquire the Torah. One of them is to have a certain sense of ahava, of love for the Torah. So loving the things that we learn, appreciating it, taking it to heart and say, this is special to me. This is something that is close to me. So for all of you who have come to this shir, the fact that you consistently come is a sign of your love for the Torah. And Hashem should bench each and every one of us, that we should have this Shavuos coming up. It should be a Zman Matan Toraseinu. We should be able to accept the gift that Hashem is handing to us by telling him, Ritzonenu Liros Es Malkeinu, Hashem, we want to see, we want to connect to you, and therefore we accept the Torah. And Hashem should grant us that we should consistently have our love for the Torah, which will be an inspiration for us and for our entire community. Thank you all for coming.